All right, so today we are hitting American World War One. We've already covered rise of world power, but now we're gonna hit American World War One. It's gonna be the end of this one unit for our next test. So let's go ahead and get started with America in World War One. Now, this is a fast-paced version of it, so I'm going to go kind of fast, try to keep up. But essentially, you got to understand World War One was fought between 1914 and 1918. Most of Europe's involved in this, especially for the interest of this class being U.S. history. We're going to focus on the U.S. history part of it. Now, you do have to understand why the war starts and then why the United States joins. The U.S. does not enter until 1917. So this war goes on for 3 years. So let's talk about those causes of the war that actually caused the war itself before we got involved in 1914. Militarism was the rise of the military. Nations across Europe were competing, enlarging the military. The United States did the same thing during the Spanish-American War. For us, it was the Navy. We expanded our U.S. Navy. Most countries were doing it at the time. So you got to imagine it's like an arms race. The more one country expands their Navy, the country next door is going to expand their Navy, and eventually you get this tensions built up. It's bound to collapse. So militarism was the buildup of the navies and the military itself. Think of it like an arms race. Alliance is pretty self-explanatory. You attack me, my friend attacks you, and we drag other people into the war. I'll explain that a little more next slide. Nationalism. This is simply extreme pride in your nation. It got to a point where even when World War I was announced in Germany, they had parades. People were excited and happy to go to war. It was like they were going to the Super Bowl to prove how great their team was. Nationalism was very strong at the time, and that was throughout the world, or through the Western Hemisphere and Europe as well. Imperialism, we've actually talked about before. America had already practiced imperialism with Spanish-American War, with Guam, Philippines, open door policy in China. Europe had really focused on the scramble for Africa, which covers more of a world history, but they're fighting for colonies in Africa left and right, and so that created competition. Add that in there with the idea of militarism in those colonies, you can see how things are going to build up. If Britain grabs one area, makes it a colony, and right next door, Germany grabs that area, makes it a colony, and they're both building up the military there, you can see how this is going to inevitably lead to war. And then the spark of everything is the assassination, which we're going to talk about in just a second. As a matter of fact, I'm going to fast forward to the assassination. If we go back to this map here, Austria-Hungary is upset. They're very mad that their Archduke was killed. And so they make these demands to Serbia. Okay, so Archduke tells Serbia, hey, you guys, if you do not meet these demands, and this was a whole list of demands, money, they want to give up certain people. It was a lot of demands that just wasn't going to happen. And they give them a 30-day ultimatum. So if you don't answer these demands in 30 days, we will invade Serbia. Now, here's a problem with alliances. See, there's another team red right here called Russia, right? And Russia tells Austria-Hungary, if you declare war on Serbia, we're going to declare war on you, and we begin to mobilize our troops here, okay? But then you have this other team, Germany, who is friends of Austria-Hungary. Germany tells Russia, if you go to war with Austria-Hungary, we're going to move our troops here. Little does Germany know that France has a secret alliance with Russia. And that alliance said that if Germany attacked either one, the other one would jump in. So France says, Germany, you attack Russia, we're going to attack you. And they begin to move the troops here. So 30 days goes by, Austria-Hungary will invade Serbia. Russia would declare war on Austria-Hungary. Germany declares war on Russia. France declares war on Germany. And Great Britain waits. See, it's actually pretty hilarious. Great Britain takes a interesting approach to this. They are essentially going to say, hey, we are not going to get involved. We're going to mind our own business. We have no reason to get involved. Like, we have no alliances, none of that nonsense. So we're going to let this play out. But for us to stay neutral, we have to respect other neutral countries. So they tell Germany, hey, Germany, if you invade through Belgium to France, we will declare war on you, Germany. Great Britain says we will declare war on you if you invade through Belgium. Because Belgium is a neutral country and you can't do that. Now, in reality, Belgium knew the Germans would do this. Germans have practiced a Schleifen plan. This was their plan. They practiced this every summer. They mobilized troops all over Germany to this point here to practice this. It was well known. So they knew it was going to happen. So Great Britain can pretend to be neutral, but we know they already picked a side. In reality, they don't like Germany. They're upsetting the balance of the world. They're a rising power. They're not big fans of it. And the Kaiser, the king of Germany, is kind of crazy too. But nonetheless, that's essentially how Great Britain joins, and we have our two sides here. Once Germany does go through Belgium and attacks France, and it's pretty successful, Great Britain will declare war on Germany, and we have our two opposing sides here. Now, what happens once Germany invades into France, it's called this area here, the Western Front. In green here, the border here, there'll be trenches all throughout here, and we call it the Western Front. Now, in this class, that's all we focus on, because Germany is kind of screwed in a way. They, if you look at Germany, they have no, they only have one coastline, and on that coastline right here is the only way ships can get in to get supplies and materials, right? That's the only way you can get grain, wheat, weapons, anything you can get in by boat. That's the only way Germany can get. Problem for Germany is that there's a really good navy nearby, the Navy of Great Britain. And Great Britain is going to set up a blockade, a naval blockade all around Germany. So no ships can get into Germany. Great Britain has a huge navy. Germany has a very small one. They're a younger nation, barely getting started. So Germany looks at this, and the only way they can defeat the British Navy is not with another navy, but with submarines. Now, Germans won't call them submarines. We do. Germans call them. If Great Britain has that blockade set up all around Germany, you can't get food in or out. And that was the whole point. The British wanted to blockade Germany so the people in Germany starve. That's what we call total war. When you get the nation part, at this point, pretty much a free here is U.S. history. U-boat. When you go back to this pavilion to give you guys an overall view, but essentially Archduke Franz Ferdinand, he is indeed from Austria, but he's going to be sent down to Serbia to give a speech. Now, this time, there's a lot of arguments about what exactly is going on, but for the most part, you should know that Austria-Hungary is really influencing Serbia's politics and getting involved. And a lot of people in Serbia who didn't like that. They felt Serbia should be independent, not Austria-Hungary driven, I guess you could say. Either way, Austria-Hungary is leaning into Serbia. And there's even some politicians in Serbia who are supporting this concept. And so the Archduke, which is kind of like the prince, that this guy right here is going to go down and give a speech and come back up. He's going to take his wife with him, Sophia. When he does land, he goes on this parade route. And in this parade route, early on, he's actually attacked right here. A man steps out from the crowd and throws a bomb at the Archduke's car, hits his hood, bounces over, and explodes in the car behind him. The Archduke takes off, and in all foolishness, he continues to the town square where he'll give his speech. In modern times, you would get the heck out of there, but he goes to town square, gives a speech, and that's not the big problem. The big problem is when he heads back. When he's heading towards the airport, he tells his driver, let's go to the hospital. I want to visit the guys in the truck, in the car that was behind us. I believe it was a general. And he says, I want to go visit them in hospital, see how they're doing. The driver takes a fatal wrong turn here. On the way back from the speech, he makes the wrong turn, and it essentially is a dead end. Now, on that corner, you see there is a deli there. You see, there is a terrorist group in Serbia. The ones that was behind the car bomb, it was a terrorist group called Black Hand. And they really pushed for Serbia independence. And they looked at the Archduke as a threat from Austria-Hungary. So that's why they threw the car bomb. But in this case of statistically horrible odds, on that deli, when the Archduke's driver turned that corner, inside that deli was a member of Black Hand. He was eating a sandwich. He puts the sandwich down. He follows the car around the corner because he knows something that the car driver doesn't know. He knows there is a dead end. And what the member of Black Hand does is, as the car stopped to turn around at the dead end, he walks up and puts a few bullets in this guy here and his wife here. His last words to his wife was something similar to stay alive for the children. And she does not, she dies. What's ironic is when they're asking the Archduke, how is he doing? How's he doing? And this guy actually says a famous phrase, this is nothing, which becomes kind of crazy because this starts the Great War. Remember, nobody knew there would be a second one, so we're going to call this the Great War at first. Nobody had any clue that this would start the Great War, but it does. Because for all, let's back to a map, when we see these maps involved, and you have to imagine, essentially, then we get history, you go and keep in mind. So map, what's going on. As the Germans invade France, they get pretty close to Paris, they get bogged down. Essentially, the French put up machine guns and start shooting at the Germans. And keep in mind, these machine guns are huge. Like at one point in this war, they'll have their own concrete nest, as you can see here. But nonetheless, the machine guns are huge. As all these guys approach, machine guns can hold a lot of people off. And when you get shot at, you get down. And you dig a hole to stay in there. And then as both sides get more and more support, they try to outflank each other. They try everything possible to get around each other. And they end up getting caught on both sides in the ground, being shot at by machine guns. And as they dig these holes in the ground, the holes get connected, and over time, you end up having a lengthy trench. Essentially, imagine over time, one side bringing in a machine gun, and the other side here has to get down and dig a hole. And this side, say they try to outflank them, they bring in more machine guns, right? This happens, and then say you try to outflank these guys, they bring up a machine gun. So this happens all up and down the border of France and Germany, and we will call it to the other fronts and a lot more than that. But what that creates is trench, and this is a trench warfare. World War I, you have to understand it's a trench warfare to describe it. You can see how difficult it is. If this was, say, the British side, the Germans, if they did try to make it through, they first had to get through what we call no man's land. And no man's land was brutal because you had artillery back here bombing nonstop, right? And then you have the guys shooting from the trenches, right? You have the machine gun mowing them down. Sound effects makes this much more better. So say you get through all that. Somehow you push through and get to pass a barbed wire as well, right? You get through all that. You get through the trenches. You still have to take not one, not two, but 3 trenches to force these guys back. And they tried everything. Like the British was in 100,000 men. Like this was essentially a death toll. It was one of the worst wars. It was the worst war at the time because these guys didn't know how to fight this new war. Machine guns created trench warfare, and it created these horrible conditions that you see here. And it just went on and on and on for years. For 3 years before America jumps in for 1 more year before this actually ends. Whenever I show my class, I always recommend, if you can just YouTube this, 1917 movie trailer. It is a British version of it, but it shows you how sophisticated trenches get and how intense it is over years. There's a lot to this, but we'll stick to mainly the U.S. history part of it. Now, in order to deal with these trenches, both sides get pretty creative. And I'll always argue humans, when they have to kill each other, I deal with trench warfare. They couldn't compete with the machine, couldn't figure out. Eventually, as time goes on, they try things like, hey, let's bombard this side with bombs, let's drop artillery on the trenches, 24 hours straight, and then we'll attack. Well, if you're getting bombed for 12 hours straight, you know they're about to attack you, so you clear out and you wait until the bombing starts, and then you resupply the trench, and you're ready for them. There's even times when they actually dug, if you look this up, you'll see how they dug tunnels underneath to cause explosives and blow up the trench. But then this side would hear about it, and they would dig a tunnel underneath their tunnel and blow up their tunnel. Now, it was nonstop for 3.5 years. Both sides were determined to kill each other at all costs, and it's created what it looks like. That was one way to suffer, find out a whole bunch of good ways to do it. This is a quick idea if you were doing ChatGPT and ask for the top 10 battles. And some of these, you can tell when ChatGPT messes up. I asked for deadly battles. I've seen other battles listed, and it turns out it just depends on what you call a battle. For instance, this one is 302 days. Well, some people would call that a campaign, not a battle. So there's some stuff that might be missing. If you're really familiar with the battles of World War I, you'll think a couple are missing, and that's pretty much why. But you can see the numbers regardless. The whole point of this was to show you the death tolls in these battles. Up to 500,000 people are killed in one battle. Like this is unbelievable, tragic event that unfolded because of these fools that just didn't. They realized they can't do it. The basic war casualties, technology, that henceforth the name has no advantage. Back here is Great War. Now, what we do see humans do is create new weapons to kill each other. Probably the worst one from this time period is what we call poisonous gas. And there's really two types. If you look into this, there's mustard and chlorine. Poisonous gas was a big one. Here you have a picture of 3 men from World War I, 3 soldiers, and one of these guys is Hitler. Hitler was a minor soldier in World War I, and if you're wondering which guy he was, let me show you. It doesn't turn the tide of the war, but it starts to show how inhumane this war has become. Airplanes are pretty ineffective. Like whenever students are like, hey, what do we write next to poison gas? I always tell students, hey, that's important because they're using World War I and that's it. Hitler doesn't even use it on his enemies in World War II. Airplanes are pretty ineffective. They're really for recon. Effect was actually the tanks. Our state test actually asked about that quite man's land. The last one that we need to talk about are U-boats. They change everything. If you guys remember, you have to know for our state test, are U-boats. Now, U-boats change everything. It creates total war, essentially. We call total war, okay? And this is the first time we see this in history on a large scale, at least. Is take the fight to the people. Make the civilians hate war so much, they demand the war to end. That was the goal of the British blockade. So for a good example of total war, I always point out the British blockades Germany, so civilians starve. But U-boats are for instance, if you take a look here, this is definitely mustard because you can actually see it released to the other side. Eventually, they go from this way to actually canisters to force the, instead of just turning on the gas. But mustard gas would make you blister up. If you zoom in on this guy here, we see all the blisters that pop up. You can see what happens if those blisters hit in certain areas. The before and after picture of this poor soul. Here, mustard gas has hit these guys' eyes, and this is pretty typical after a gas attack. Many would go blind from it, and the best bet was to put one guy in the very front who could see, tell everybody to hold on to the guy in front of you, and then you would tell that guy in the front to start marching. Lead these guys, because you don't want to see, march back to the medical tent away from the trenches. Horrendous. Here we have this guy clearly hit by chlorine gas. Chlorine is invisible, but once it enters your lungs, it turns to water, and so essentially you're drowning inside your lungs, even if you're not in water outside. You can see we tried everything. Horses need to be protected. Horses are essential for supplies. We're talking about a time when we just had the Model T Ford. We don't have really sophisticated transportation. The big trucks don't exist yet, and even if they did, they couldn't get through the mud and rough terrain. Horses were essential for World War I. Even dogs had gas masks, just to show you that whole concept there. So the canister where you actually breathe the filtered air through, right? So if you're a German soldier, you had to shave your mustache. It does play a big role. You get a chance. The big one had a huge hit, and was to get across that nose. And this side by side, here we go. He was the one with the mustache. Hitler was a messenger, and he tried to get around. He had to get around all the time. He was hit by gas. And German soldiers had to shave their mustache once they came up with gas masks, because the seal on a gas mask went around like this to keep the air out. And then on the front, you had, henceforth, Hitler, if you're wondering why in World War II this guy has a like doo-doo looking mustache here, that's because he kept it after World War I. If you had that mustache after World War I, you were a hero, you were a veteran, and people knew you served. So 20 years after World War I, he couldn't get over the fashion statement. And he wanted everybody to know, I once was a veteran as well, so don't forget. So poisonous gas to watch as far as we're concerned. And the tanks, although they seem pretty primitive here, top speed 4 miles per hour, they provided cover. If you're trying to get across no man's lands from your trench to their trench, you could lead with tanks. The man hide behind these or inside these for cover, right? Or smile, or all around it, behind it for cover, and then you can make your way across no man's land. And then even if you got these tracks big enough, in some parts of the trenches, you can roll right over. Tanks were very effective in the war. The problem is they don't become that effective to the very end when they're getting produced in mass numbers. But tanks were very important to break what we call the tie, the stalemate of the war. Oftentimes our state test doesn't call it draw or tie. The trench warfare creates a stalemate. And tanks' main purpose was to fix that. Why using U-boats would be ultimately the biggest failure of Germany. If you take a look at the U-boats, there are only 35 men on board, and not very many at all. When you think about it, it's pretty cramped style, especially when you look at how it's set up here as far as the 6 torpedoes. You got half of this thing's actual machinery alone. It's not a lot of room on there, 35 men at best, okay? So when a submarine sinks a giant ship like this one, the submarine has a little problem. You see, there's an unwritten rule of war at the time that when one ship sinks another ship, the ship that sinks, when all these people get on lifeboats and all the people start drowning in the water and they need all the help they can get, and they're begging and screaming, they need help, they're drowning. The ship that did the sinking, their job, the unwritten rule of war is that they take these guys as prisoners of war. You can't leave them to drown and die in the ocean. You have to scoop them up. They're prisoners of war, that's fine, but you can't leave them to drown and die. That's just inhumane. I know it's weird, it's war, but apparently that's inhumane. But think about it. Can a submarine that can barely fit 35 guys take on all these POWs and drowning people? They can't. So Germany didn't do that. Germany did not follow the rules of war. They sunk ships without notice. It's an underwater sneak attack. They don't save the people, they let them drown. So the world looks at Germany and say, Germany, you're the bad guys in this. For Germany's defense, what else could they do? They couldn't compete with the British Navy. They had to use the U-boat. The Flyboys movie trailer, you'll see how primitive the airplanes are at that time. We're talking about canvas material, machine guns getting shot down. Towards the end of the war, you actually have a little bit more done with them, but it's still pretty limited. You can see the first ones, this is how you actually shot out of. Germans were the first to figure out how to take a machine gun and make it shoot in between the propeller. It's actually really impressive when you think about it. And here you have German's ace, Red Baron. You can look him up if you want to see a hero for Germans who's pretty good, had a lot of shots killed, but people not shot down. But airplanes were ineffective. They had to use the submarines. They had no choice. And so they become essentially the bad guys. Now, this is a U.S. history class, so we got to maintain that whole concept of, hey, this is U.S. history, stick to it, don't get too far off topic. And so now we get America intervenes. Wilson is president. Our progressive President Wilson keeps us out of war, keeps us neutral. That's actually how he won his re-election campaign. It's funny, Americans not wanting to go to war. That's been a long time. But nonetheless, he keeps us neutral the whole time. Now, why do you stay neutral? Well, there's a big bonus to staying neutral. Look how much money you can loan. What will eventually be our allies, the British and the French, by 1960, we've loaned them or sold them $3 billion worth of material and food. Germany, only $1.2 million. So when we look at this, the big benefit of staying neutral is trade, money, right? Trade or money, loans, whatever it might be. Typically trade is like the more neutral word to use, you see on test. But we have billions invested in our allies, in the British and France. And you better bet, if we got to pick a side to win, we're going to pick the side that owes us the most money. So we want them to win and they pay us back. The side that owes us the least money, they may pay us back, but it's unlikely. Like you got a better chance of getting paid back by the winner. So while we go for 3 years and we say neutral, we're not really neutral. We've pretty much picked a side, at least the U.S. government has. The American people, they're leaning toward against Germany for a couple of reasons. One, there's a Zimmerman telegram. That actually really persuades people. This happened in early 1917. The British government intercepted this telegram right here. And they decode it, and they discover that what had happened is that the Germans had a secret proposal to Mexico that said, Mexico, if you attack the United States, after the war is over, Germany will come back and help you get this land back. Okay. At this time, U.S. isn't at war with Germany, but Germany was desperate because the U.S. was giving so much material, supplies, food to Great Britain. Germany needed somebody to keep America busy. So Germany proposed an alliance with Mexico. Hey, attack the U.S., keep them busy for us. After the war, we'll come back and get you all that land they took from you way back in the day. Of course, if Americans see that telegram, they don't like that too much. If you, that's what you suspected and made you mad, that's what Americans felt, and they wanted war, right? That was early 1917, right? But over time, it does all add up. This is a one war where, like, there's not one spark. Like, Spanish-American War, USS Maine sent us to war with Spain, right? When that exploded. This is different. This war, it's quite a bit of things over time. Freedom of seas is like the main theme we have here. Blockading people is not freedom of seas, but also Germans doing unrestricted submarine warfare plays a really big role in that. Essentially, we have the blockade. So Germany has to use German U-boats. And one time that they used U-boats was a pretty horrific time. It was against the ship Lusitania. This is a U.S. ship, or British ship, coming from the U.S. to Great Britain. It was a cruise ship. Germany took out an ad in a local Philadelphia paper that said, do not board this ship. Any ship that goes to Great Britain waters, we will torpedo and destroy. We are at war. Don't do it. But nonetheless, 120 Americans get on that bad boy, that cruise ship, and Germany sinks it, as they promised they would. As they got closer to Great Britain, it's a war zone, and Germany sinks it without warning. 120 Americans die. So in 1915, we'd already picked a side. Americans hated Germans. That, the Zimmerman telegram in 1917, it pretty much a side was already picked when it came down to the Germans versus the British. We did not like the Germans. Okay. Now the Germans do, for their credit, they mess up again later. They actually sink a ferry with women and children on it, and they make a pledge that they won't do unrestricted submarine warfare again. They pitch this idea, hey, what we're going to do, we'll warn the boat, we're coming aboard, we'll search it to make sure it has no weapons, and then let you go, okay? If not, we will sink it and we'll give you fair warning, okay? And that was the idea. Like, the whole reason the British actually sank the Lusitania was they suspected American government putting weapons on the lower decks of the cruise ship, and essentially using humans as shields to get the weapons over to Great Britain. The Germans were right. Later on, we find out the U.S. government was doing just that. And that's why they were sinking any ship. They had no clue what actually had weapons and what didn't. But they make this pledge and say, we're not going to do this anymore. But less than a year later, Germany's really suffering, and they realize they can't win this war. They can't win this war by trying to board every ship and search for it. So there's just too many ships. So about March of 1917, Germany announces we're returning to unrestricted submarine warfare, meaning no restrictions. We're going to sink any ship that comes our way. Anywhere in the waters, we will ship and destroy. We will sink, we will torpedo and destroy it, no questions asked. Fair warning, don't send innocent ships towards Great Britain. The U.S. continues to send merchant ships, and I believe in March alone, the Germans will sink 5 U.S. ships, merchant ships, and Wilson eventually says enough. The President of the United States says enough's enough, and asks for U.S. Congress for declaration of war in Germany, and so they do so. And so when we look at the reason why America joins, we see the Zimmerman telegram, the sinking of Lusitania, unrestricted submarine warfare is the main one. It drags us into the war, and we have this belief of freedom of the seas, that every country everywhere should have the right to travel the seas without issues. Whether it's because of a blockade or submarine warfare, it's not cool. So those are the 4 reasons why America goes to war. If you're thinking unrestricted submarine warfare, it's pretty much freedom of sea, right? It's just the way the STAAR test asks, it varies greatly. All right, I'm rolling through this really fast because there's actually a lot of memorization. Pershing is going to be the commander of U.S. troops. We don't call them U.S. Army at the time. We call them the American Expeditionary Force. I don't know why the British had their own version of it. But nonetheless, Pershing is our guy. So as far as state test goes, you can just memorize that and you're good. You also have to know one battle that the U.S. plays a major role in. As a matter of fact, 117,000 Americans will die in this 1.5-month battle, roughly 6-week battle of Oregon Forest. It's important because it breaks the German supply line. So now at the German front, the officers, soldiers can't get help, food, weapons, because Americans took over a railroad station in between Germany and the front line. And so Germany is forced to declare an armistice. For you and me, we would just call that a ceasefire. But in this test, they call it armistice. An armistice is not into the war. It is a ceasefire. It is a pause so that we can decide on a treaty. But it does lead to an armistice. That's why that battle is so important. They actually make the armistice. They send a message out. They say at the 11th hour on the 11th day of the 11th month, we will have no more shooting until we find a treaty. And that is November 11th. And so guess what Veterans Day is? November 11th. And every country does that. After the Great War, that became kind of a good day for all countries to pick. Some countries call it Remembrance Day or whatever, but Veterans Day. One guy that shined, one American that stood out in this war itself was Alvin York. He will actually get into a German trench, kill 25 Germans. He'll get a hold of a machine gun, start turning the German machine gun on the Germans, and 132 people will surrender to him. For that, Alvin York gets the Medal of Honor. Very simple. Just remember York, Medal of Honor, and you're good. In this class, you have to remember 3 guys that got the Medal of Honor for the semester. He is the first one. Now, every time we talk about war, we got to talk about the Homefront. If you take a look at the Homefront, there's a few things you should know. One, we have the Selective Service Act. You and me know it as the draft. Other parts of the world, they call it conscription. I always make sure my students know both because on a test, oftentimes the state uses the word conscription. But nonetheless, it is essentially a draft. When you turn 18, you have to submit your information, and the government can pull your name if we go on war. Now back home, think about it, if 2 million troops come to Europe from America, and there are many white males. There are some black males. Check out Harlem Hellfighters if you're interested. But about 2 million go to Europe, mostly white males. That means there's a lack of workforce at home. And what we're going to see is that African-American males are going to move out of the South to those big cities in Detroit, Philadelphia, Chicago, even New York areas like Harlem eventually start growing because they look for work. And people in Detroit, like Henry Ford, they recruited guys from the South to fill these jobs. And so we see a mass exodus of people from the South, African Americans from the South, to these big cities. Now that creates a really big problem when those 2 million guys come back home after the war. But that's a different story. If you want to look it up, you can look up Red Summer of 1919. There's some of the worst race riots we've seen in America, but that's not a TEKS, so they don't ask about tests. So we kind of have time for it. This war is paid for through higher taxes. They're now paying 2% income tax if you're wealthy, and especially war bonds. I always make a point to make sure you know a Liberty bond is the same thing as a war bond. Don't get confused. World War I, they hated Germans so much, everything was Liberty. Instead of German Shepherd, they called it Liberty Shepherd. Instead of sauerkraut, they called it Liberty Cabbage. It was, I guess, supposed to make fun, but yeah, it's dumb, whatever. But I do want to show this graph. Okay, imports are what countries buy, what we buy as a country from other countries. Exports is what we send out, what we sell to other countries. So when you look at any graph and you see we have a lot more exports and imports, think of it like your home, right? You're selling a lot more than you're buying, which means your economy is doing good. It's actually great. You're making tons of money. If your exports are more than imports, and that's a pretty big gap between the two, that's awesome. You're doing wonderful. So every time you see a test question that asks about more jobs, during wartime, there'll be more jobs. During wartime, there's more money. During war times, it's a better economy. Anytime, war equals better economy in America, always. Even if we're not at war, because these years, if you look at these years, we're not at war yet we're not at war. But look how much our exports take off because we're selling to our future allies. We're not at war until 1917. And so that's when the exports actually leveled off because we're using those war materials. Post-war, we're going to have a blow up too, for a little bit at least. But our economy is great. Every time you see anything about the economy and war, know that it means great for us, great for our economy, essentially. To just make it short, simple. Now, every time there's a war, we have to question some of our rights. In this case, we have Espionage Act. You need to know that it made it a crime to criticize the war effort. If you said something bad about the war effort, if you printed it in the press, if you protested it, that was illegal. Now, one guy, Schneck, does this. He does just this. He's passing out pamphlets telling people burn their draft card, don't go for the draft. Burning a draft card was like the ultimate sign of protest. Like, they send you a draft card in the mail and tell you to report here for your enlistment. you burn the draft card that says you're not going to go, kind of, right? So Schneck's telling people to do that. He gets arrested for violating the Espionage Act. And he says, wait a second, this is my freedom of speech. I'm passing out these pamphlets, that's freedom of press. I have a right to assemble. He says, oh, this is Espionage Act violates my First Amendment. And you all know where, if a law is created and it violates your constitutional amendment, it goes to the Supreme Court, right? And the Supreme Court makes this ruling. Stated that the First Amendment did not protect words that create a clear and present danger. They use that infamous example: you cannot yell fire in a crowded movie theater, watch everybody trample out and die, get hurt, and then say, just kidding, can't get mad, freedom of speech. Fire in a crowded movie theater, that phrase is synonymous with this court case because that's when it's first heard by the Supreme Court. And essentially they say, if there's a clear and present danger, you can't use freedom of speech. And guess what, guys? War is a clear and present danger. So your rights are not unlimited as you might suspect, especially in times of war. So now we got this armistice. Now this war is over. We got the rights being questioned in courts and stuff like that. We do have Wilson coming up with this master plan. It's called Wilson's 14 points. And Wilson's 14 points, he is going to stop war from ever happening again. Here you have the actual text. On this side, I have it broken down 2 ways you can understand it. And the secret diplomacy was essentially saying, hey, no more alliances. That a big cause of this war was alliances. We can't have those secret alliances anymore. Freedom of seas, that's because of the U-boats. Remember how you say the submarines were hurting people's chances to travel across the sea, blockades. He said, we need these things. We need to get rid of trade barriers. That's never been asked about in STAAR tests. Reduction of armaments, reduction of arms, that's obvious. It just claims on colonies. That really had more to do with the Africa scramble. He also has Austria-Hungary divided up. And if you Austria-Hungary to be weakened, they're too powerful, likely to go to war again. Okay. And the next thing that they do that's actually pretty interesting, or next thing that he proposes is a creation of a new country. So we need a new country from the Polish people. And this new country, some of them are listened to, some aren't. The probably one of the most, absolutely the one that asked the most on STAAR tests, and probably the most infamous one is number 14. And that is his plan to create a League of Nations. And the League of Nations was a wonderful idea by Wilson. He said, imagine a Congress of people where each person represents a country. And we all meet together when we have a problem. And say this guy from Russia wants to invade this one country, Ukraine. The rest of the League of Nations votes, and they all decide, and even if it's a small vote, even if some people said no, they vote and they decide we have to go to war with Russia. Russia probably is not going to attack Ukraine if the whole world goes to war against them, right? That's the whole point of League of Nations. Come together, make sure nothing ever happens again, and prevent war. The whole point of all the 14 points was to prevent war. The League of Nations was key and essential for that. So he proposes that for the treaty and this map. You need it to be right. Points, let's add these in there. League of Nations does get in the Treaty of Versailles. I have here the before and after. Before World War I, after World War I. Austria-Hungary is just divided up and crushed. And thinking, why would you do that? Your main reason you do that is punishment, but also more importantly, here in the middle of Germany and Poland. These two, or Germany and Russia, these two guys hate each other so much, always fighting throughout history. And he says the one way we can prevent that is we need a country right here in the middle. And so, without asking anybody, he suggests the idea of creating Poland, kind of like a buffer. So Germany won't go to war with Russia as easy, and Russia won't go to war with Germany. And so that's the idea. If you're know anything about World War II, you know that does not work out very well. But nonetheless, that was his 13th point out of 14 that Wilson brought to the table when he was ready to negotiate a treaty. He said, hey, I got Treaty of Versailles will end World War I for Europe. It will break apart Austria-Hungary. It will create Poland. Germany has to agree to the war guilt clause that says we're at fault for everything and we'll pay everybody back. It will cause havoc in the 1920s. You see hyperinflation, that's Germany because of this. Pretty much we dismantle the empire. They're no longer have a king as Kaiser. They have a republic. but the Republic is miserable. They're poor, there's inflation, people are starving. It's horrible. It does not look good. That's why they give up on the Republic and go towards a dictator, but that's foreshadowing. Now, part of the Treaty of Versailles was the League of Nations, but the United States would not ratify the Treaty of Versailles. The president negotiated this, it's his idea, but in America, the Senate has to ratify the treaty, and when this comes back to America, the two countries are U.S. and Russia. Russia is going through like a civil war, and they become communists. So I tell my kids, hey, just ignore them. They're commies. So they're not invited to join the League of Nations. That's kind of a shortened version of it, and not the whole truth. But to keep it simple, they're communists, so they're not allowed to join. The U.S. refuses. The League. As a problem behind everybody is no. We will not sign the Treaty of Versailles. The Senate refuses to do so. Wilson even goes on a campaign tour across America begging people to tell the senators to vote yes, ratify the treaty, join the League of Nations. So much that Wilson actually has a stroke. The running joke is that the first female U.S. president is Wilson's wife, because for the latter part of Wilson's career, he's paralyzed. He's confined to bed, and his wife does all the work. But that's hearsay. Nobody knows because she kept him hidden from public after that stroke that he had that really messed him up quite a bit. He actually dies a couple years later after he leaves office, after he's done. But nonetheless, you can see from his cartoon, the United States is the keystone. They have to be here for this bridge to hold, for the League of Nations to hold. And ironically, we wanted it. Our president had the idea, but we don't do it. We don't join the League. Two countries don't join the problem with freedom of action. If we join the League of Nations and they vote to go to war, we have to go to war. We're forced to do so. And so senators like Henry Cabot Lodge, he would come back and tell Americans, no, like if we join the League of Nations, we'll lose all our freedom. We'll lose, it's this word I like to use, autonomy. Okay, that's a word I like to use. Autonomy has that self-control. He said the United States joins the League of Nations, we lose our autonomy. We won't have any control over our own decisions. We'll be forced to go to war if everybody else goes to war. And America does not like that. Americans do not like being told what to do. So they would not ratify the treaty. They would not join the League of Nations. And instead, America takes a turn. Instead of the pre-World War I America of expanding the empire after Spanish-American War, getting Hawaii and other places, and then we go to World War I, the reflection is isolationism. After World War I, we go into deep isolationism. We don't care about what goes on in other countries. So in 1920s, as Europe suffers from their Great Depression, especially Germany, we don't care. In 1930s, when dictators rise in Germany and start taking over all of Europe, we don't care because we're practicing isolationism. After World War I, we walked away and said, oh, never again. People died for no reason. It was a bloody war. We should never have got involved. It's a horrible idea. Never again do we get involved in Europe's affairs. And so as bad as things got during World War II, prior up to World War II, we didn't join. Even when Hitler invaded other countries, we didn't join. We didn't stop them. We don't have anything to do with it. We don't join until Japan bombs us. And then we join in 1941. So this is kind of a life lesson. If you're wondering why America refused to stay isolated, because last time we tried that, the rest of the world fell apart. And we ended up going to war regardless, and the casualty list was twice as bad. 40 million died in World War II, partially because we had to stay isolated. And we just decided we can't do that anymore. All right, that sums it up. If you saw the questions here, you can always pause the video, try to answer the questions to see if you get them right. Those are STAAR questions from the past. It'll help you out a little bit if you're trying to get ready for a STAAR test. And that's it until our next unit of the Roaring 20s.